couple other ones in there, but we also, for the address points and latitude and longitude coordinates, we accept spreadsheets with that information, and we can kind of do the conversion on our end. On the wireless side, propagated coverage models in GIS format again, or tower locations and antenna data, which we have a program where we input that information into a system and then it generates that propagated coverage model. So this was that visual I referred to a couple slides back, just taking a closer look at the granularity of data and the importance of it. What you're seeing on that left image, where it says address level data, that grid there of rectangles, squares, that is the public land survey system quarter sections that I referred to. And those are the same quarter sections that are in that far right image where it says comparison. And that is what we aggregate our wireline data to. So what you'll see on our on the map that we'll provide the demo for later in this Lunch and Learn are those quarter sections. So specifically here, the comparison is address level data versus census block data. And the census block data is what is currently available at the federal level. It's the FCC 477 data. And basically what that is showing is if there's one location within a given census block that is served, that entire census block is shown as being served. And that's kind of what we're trying to move further away from, because it really overstates coverage areas, and it doesn't really do a lot of good if we're trying to show, you know, the accurate broadband landscape and therefore really identify those unserved areas. And so on the left here, the green points, if you can see them, those are, you know, address points or latitude, longitude coordinates of serviceable locations, and the orange or pinkish quarter sections there. So that's basically highlighting any quarter section that contains one of those points. And then those quarter sections, again, are what we show on the map. And if you were to look at the census block image there, I kind of described this already, but it's the same points, but we're basically taking any census block that a point falls in and calling that as served. And then if we were to then convert those same census blocks to quarter sections, on the right side, that comparison image is where you're basically seeing the two different coverages that can be shown based on that kind of data. So again, the orange quarter sections there is showing a broadband serviceable area based off of address level data. The purple quarter sections is what we would be showing if we received that same serviceable data, but in census blocks. So it's a huge difference in the actual coverage area there. And with the quarter sections, the reason that we use those is we kind of consider it the happy medium between the larger geographic areas like the census blocks, which can overrepresent state coverage, and putting actual addresses on the map, you know, places of business, people's homes. We want to be sensitive to that data and not share that type of information. So we found that the quarter sections are kind of that middle ground that paints that more accurate picture of the landscape while still maintaining that anonymity. And then just a little bit on how we actually use the data. As I mentioned, the publicly accessible map, we have 2 different versions of that, which we'll run through demos of each coming up here. But those are available. It's that aggregated data by speed tier that I referred to earlier. That's what you'll see on the map. And then we also do data analysis internally for state agencies and other stakeholders. And then we also support stakeholders at more local levels, such as regional councils of government, tribal nations, counties, municipalities, that sort of thing. And one of our biggest stakeholders, partners, is the Colorado Broadband Deployment Board within DORA, which is the Department of Regulatory Affairs. And specifically the Broadband Fund that they run, which since 2016 has awarded $42 million in grants to 54 projects. And so they have 2 grant cycles throughout the course of each year where service providers apply for grants, and the deployment board uses our data that we collect from providers and our analysis on that data to help identify those unserved areas and therefore the areas of need as they're going through their grant application process. And I will pass it back over to Megan, and she will talk a little bit about federal broadband data.
Great, thanks, Tony. So yeah, I just want to make a quick mention of the federal broadband data. We get the question a lot about, doesn't the federal government already do this? Why is Colorado also mapping broadband? And Tony kind of touched on it earlier with the census blocks issue. In order to get accurate, actionable data, Colorado has found that we need to do this ourselves. We can't wait around for the federal government to change their processes. They are currently in the process of changing the way they collect data at the federal level. The Broadband Data Act, data stands for Deployment Accuracy and Technological Availability. So the Broadband Data Act was passed by Congress this last spring, and it requires the FCC to collect more granular broadband service availability data, create a challenge process, among a few other requirements. So the FCC, at the same time that the Broadband Data Act was in the works, they were working on what they called the Digital Opportunity Data Collection, or DODC, which is basically updating their process for collecting data. What's happening now is that the FCC is incorporating the requirements of the Data Act into their DODC proceeding. I think comments and reply comments on that proceeding came in September and October. So we're just waiting now for the FCC to move forward with that proceeding. And then one last thing I'll mention on the federal side, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the NTIA, began a project they call the National Broadband Availability Map. This is different than the FCC's National Broadband Map. The NBAM is basically a tool that the NTIA has created for states and other governments to use as a decision-making tool. So there's a lot of different data collection and mapping efforts going on. What we're trying to do in Colorado is make sure that we align our process with what's happening at the federal level, so that we're not doing extra work, the service providers aren't doing extra work, and we can get the data we need at a local level in a timely fashion to use it for decision making. So I think next up is a Q&A session on what we've covered so far. And then we will get into the online map tutorials in just a minute. So I'll open it up for questions on the data. Let's see. It looks like we have one question in the chat. So it says, Tony mentioned PLSS for wireline. Let's see, does any of the PLSS data have DSLAM or head-end location info? Is there any way to begin to access distance from DSLAM or head-end? And I might need, that's from Slopeside. If you want to, if you can unmute yourself and elaborate on that a little. I'm not quite sure how to answer it, Tony. If you have any thoughts, you can jump in.
Yeah, I think if you can elaborate more, be happy to try to answer that. My initial response would be, we do not have that information tied to our PLSS data.
Okay. Well, if Slopeside has a chance to speak up, then we can revisit that question in a minute. We have a question from Nate Wallowitz. Can you speak to the provider infrastructure sharing project and the availability of that data? Yeah, so infrastructure has been an interesting challenge for us in the past decade. Essentially, we do have some infrastructure information. Many companies regard that information as proprietary and do not share with us. And because we have kind of a piecemeal data set on infrastructure, we're hesitant to present that because it's not the whole picture. So while we do have some of that information, there's limits on how we can share it, who we can share it with, and what we can present. But if there are specific projects that folks are working on, we're happy to work with you to identify infrastructure in the project areas that you can use. And there's probably some part of the data set that we can share with you as well. Okay, so there's a question from Kevin Sweeney. The data, at least in my location, is wrong for all providers, yet they can all tell me individually on their website that they don't provide service at my location. Why can't the CBO get the same data for the map? Tony, do you want to take that one?
Whew, that's the million-dollar question. Let's see, I'm rereading it here. So currently with the data collection process, It's on a voluntary basis. We, at this point, have no authority to require data from service providers. So when we do our outreach process, reaching out to providers and collecting that data, we get different types of data from different providers based on quality of data, format of data, that sort of thing. And so we continue to push for more accurate and granular data. At this point, you know, the map is only as good as the data that we receive. So while we continue to work to try to get better data, it's something we've been struggling with for years, and it's really one of the biggest challenges that we're faced with. Megan, I don't know if you had anything to add on to that.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to, that example that Tony showed earlier of the point location data versus the census block data. We know that the providers know where they can serve, but the way the reporting is set up, especially what they prepare for the FCC, kind of creates that overstating of coverage, and that gets fed into our map. So we are working with the providers to try to, figure out how to get that more accurate data into our map and hopefully fix those areas like Kevin's where everything is wrong. And that especially happens a lot in the suburban areas. They often get ignored because, based on how the census blocks fit together, it just looks like everything is served. But we know that there's pockets. There's, a neighborhood that was built in the 1960s might not have any infrastructure in the ground, while the neighborhood right next door was built in the 2000s and they have fiber. So the fiber service available in one area kind of bleeds over in the reporting to show everything around it is served.
Megan, there were a couple questions a little further up in the chat that I'll get to before we switch over to the map side of things. So Greg asks, is there a case where a census block is smaller than 40 acres? Yeah, and as you kind of allude to, urbanized areas do tend to have some of those smaller census blocks compared to the more rural areas where they're massive. And if the follow-up question might be, why not, use those instead of the quarter sections? It's a good question. We, at this point, try to just kind of make sure things are standardized across the board and using those quarter sections for the entire state. Haraz asks, do you use speed tests to verify the data that providers give you? We currently do have an Ookla speed test subscription where we receive raw data from all of the speed tests taken in Colorado for their servers and their site. And we are in the middle of working through a process to utilize that data to do just that, to help verify that data that we get from providers, which is based off of maximum advertised speeds the majority of the time. So we want to look at some of the actual speeds that are coming in from users' speed tests that they're taking and look at where a lot of those discrepancies are in those speeds to, again, help verify that data that we get from providers.
Great, thanks, Tony. I think that is all for the questions I see in the chat. And we can probably just jump into the map tutorials. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and Tony, you can pick it up.
Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. Megan, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So as I touched on earlier, we have two versions of publicly available web maps. The first one that I'm going to run through is our almost kind of bare bones public version, and then Megan will run through the more specialized version that the Broadband Deployment Board uses a lot. There's some additional data layers on there that are very helpful for them as they're helping make their decisions. Previous version of our public map, there was only one version, so we had a lot of data on there, and you know there are a lot of different users for the map. You have residents just curious what service providers are in the area. You have decision makers like the Broadband Deployment Board that want to get really into it. And we kind of decided that two versions was the best way to go because the previous iteration where we just had the one version, it became kind of overloaded with information and therefore not that easy to use. So what I'm going to run through now is a quick demo on just our basic public broadband map. When you open the link, you'll see this splash screen here that shows when the data was last updated. There's a link to a user tutorial video, which will cover a lot of what I'm about to show here, but probably just in a more friendly voice than mine. So when you click OK, the first thing that you see is a bunch of colors on the map. And what do those mean? So in the top right here, this layer list, you can turn on the layers. And again, what I referred to earlier in the first part of the presentation on the data, we have our wireline coverage, and these are separated by residential and commercial. And then we have, again, residential and commercial fixed wireless coverage. And here are those speed tiers that I referred to by color. Basically, the darker the color, the faster that speed tier is. And that's greater than 1 gig and all the way down to less than 10 megs per second. And again, this is based off of maximum advertised speed provided by the service provider data. And all of these layers, you can click on and off as you see fit. I know oftentimes it gets to be a little overwhelming with a lot of data on there. So, you know, you could turn on and off each layer. And then to just kind of, if you're zooming in and you just want to see, you know, more of the map, you can just close the layers right there, reopen it with this little stacked icon here. The main function of this version of the map is this provider search. And there are a few ways to search locations here. You could type in a specific address, and when you start typing, there will be address suggestions that pop up. And if you see yours, just click on it. And there's a lot of data in here, so sometimes it takes a while to pull up the results. And since I'm doing Denver, there's a lot going on there. But what you're going to see here are all of the service providers that we know based on the data we receive to serve in that specific location. You can click and drag the corner here just to kind of expand that a little bit. And the results here are sorted by type of service, wireline providers, fixed wireless providers, and then satellite providers. Some of the basic information you'll see here is those speed tiers that are available. You can click on this little thing here for more info, and it will show you a little more information on that provider, the technology type, and then a link to their website for more information. We also have this data last reported date in here. As I mentioned earlier, the data collection side of things is not easy. So we don't always have the latest and greatest data from providers, and we want to be as transparent as possible with that information to the user. So we indicate when we receive the data last. So, you know, a lot of providers, every data cycle we have, they'll submit new data, and we thank them for that, obviously. Other providers, for one reason or another, you know, will go a couple cycles without getting updated data. So we like to just kind of keep track of that there. So as I mentioned, you could type in a specific address. You can also type in municipalities, zip codes, counties, that sort of thing, to get a more generalized area. And again, same thing, the providers in that area pop up. There is also this slider function here where you can show results within up to 15 miles of that location. And you just kind of click it and hold it and slide it. So now we're seeing providers within 3 miles of where that point is. One final way to find providers at a given location is to simply click this icon here, set location, and then you can just drop a point and it'll show you providers in that location. A quick note on this box here, it's pretty easy to accidentally close it. If you want to reopen that, there's an icon here where you just click on that and it pops back up. A couple other things real quick on this before I pass it off to Megan for the other version of the map. The resources panel here, click on that. A panel on the left side opens up with different links to different types of information. This is another way to get to the provider search. If you just click that, it opens right back up. This will take you to our speed test. If you want to take a speed test, we have links to the Colorado Broadband Office, the Colorado Broadband Fund that I referred to earlier. We have the data available in GIS format for download. If you click this link, it'll take you to a page that has the data organized by each of our data cycles dating back to, I want to say, April 2015. So you'll see April 2015, October 2015, and so on, all the way until October 2020. And we don't quite have that data yet available to download, but it should be up there within the next couple weeks. And then some basic a contact form here, and then FAQs just for more questions and answers about the map. And I think with that, Megan, I'm going to toss it back over to you for the broadband board toolkit.
Great, thank you. Just trying to get my screen share figured out. Okay, did I choose the right window, Tony? Okay, so this map will look very familiar to what you were just seeing. Let's see. So this map was created for Broadband Fund stakeholders in the application and review process. As Tony mentioned, it used to be incorporated into the public map. That became slow to load and kind of unusable and confusing. So we pulled all this stuff out and put it in its own application. You'll see that it looks pretty similar. We have a lot of the same tools here as we have in the public map. What I typically like to do is close this left side panel so that I can see the map a little bit better. You can always reopen it by clicking this little arrow. And then we covered the address search with Tony, so I can close that out. That's still accessible through this icon. So when you open up the map, you can see that there's a few layers checked on over here, and you can see that there's some coverage showing. One quick way to figure out what you're looking at is to click over here on the legend. It's right next to the layer list. That will basically show you what layers are currently visible. So if you're wondering, what layer do I have turned on? Why am I not seeing, something I thought I had checked on? If it doesn't show up in this legend, that means it's not turned on and visible. So that's a quick way to check what you're looking at. The layer list is kind of the most important part of this map, and the most important thing to remember is there's a lot of sub-levels here. So if you click these little carrots, you can drill down and figure out what layers are in the map. If you have any part of the chain that is unchecked, that means none of those layers beneath it are going to be turned on. So since I don't have this DORA broadband fund checked, none of these checked layers are going to show up until I click right there. So what we have in the layer list, I'll kind of do a quick overview of what layers we have in the map, and then go through a little bit more of the functionality and how to use it. We have a list of the Broadband Fund awards that have been awarded in the last 5 years since the beginning of that grant. Next, we have the grant application service addresses. So these are going to be the addresses that are included in the current round of broadband fund applications. This is typically what the board is looking at when they do their application review meetings. So once we get those applications in, we map that data, throw it up on here, and that's publicly available for folks to look at. So if you're wondering, click the right layers on here. I'll pick on this one. So if you're wondering, what does this Emory Telecom application look like, you can zoom in on it and see what the reported coverage looks like underneath their application area. Click that off and zoom back out. The layer that's visible when you load the map is the broadband service levels. This is basically a simplified version of the broadband coverage data. What we do is we take all the areas in the state that have known structures and combine the wireline and wireless data and say, yes, this has 25.3 or no, it doesn't. We also separate out the priority areas. So I'll just zoom in real quick on a priority area. So this just means that this area has less than 10.1. If you turn off priority, this area is still going to be listed as unserved because it's under 25.3. So just know that those layers overlap on purpose. All right, we'll turn that off. The coverage by speed, these are the same layers that are shown in the public map that Tony just went over. It's just a good reference point if you're wanting to dig deeper into a specific area. And then we have a few different broadband funding layers. There are a few different funding, well, many different funding programs that fund broadband infrastructure. We're still working on getting more of that data in here. But we'll start with the DOLA funding. So the Department of Local Affairs does some infrastructure, middle mile infrastructure funding. And as you can see here, we map this out by either county or city. And that's because the middle mile infrastructure doesn't necessarily connect specific end user locations. So when a county undertakes an infrastructure project, the impact of that is probably going to reach the whole county. So we map it out that way. These two CAF layers are, these are areas that have been reported by service providers as being connected utilizing the Connect America Fund through the FCC. They report service tier or speed tier, and as you can see, most of the reported service is not 25.3. That is because the Connect America Fund FCC program only required a 10.1 connection. This was before they increased the definition of broadband to 25.3. So you can see there's a lot of funding that has gone out throughout Colorado to serve that 10.1 tier. There's potential that there's infrastructure in place in those areas that could be upgraded pretty quickly. But as far as we know, it's only 10.1. And then there's a few more layers down here. We have counties. The Department of Local Affairs has regions where, you know, the Council of Governments is working on a broadband project or a planning project. There are economic development. We have opportunity zones and enterprise zones. So those have some, I think, tax implications. So if you're looking for, you know, these are the opportunity zones, those might have some tax boosts for broadband projects. And then the final layer on here is the community anchor institutions. One of the most important, you know, locations to connect in a community is often, you know, the school or the hospital. So those are all listed on here. I think that I'm not sure. Yeah, you can click on them and see. You know, that's an airport. The red ones are schools. So you can go through and figure out where those community anchor institutions are. And then I wanted to point out a couple just usability tools. I guess we're coming down to 10 minutes left, so I'll be quick. One thing you can do if you're wanting to zoom in on an area, this is kind of a roundabout way to do it. But if you click on the layer you want to look at, let's go with the 2020 Broadband Fund Awards and click this select button in the left. You can select those points. And then you can see over here, there's 612 points selected, and click the 3 dots and go zoom to. That's kind of the roundabout way to zoom to a project area if you're just trying to figure out where it is. And then we also have this added functionality up here that says find address or place. This is slightly different than the search address function, as it can show you the municipal boundary of an area. So I'll just type in Buena Vista. So you can see this, well, hopefully you can see that outline. That just shows the municipal boundary of the town. So if you're looking to see, you know, does this application go within the boundary of that town? That's an easy way to check that out. Okay, I'll stop there and we can open it up for questions.
There was one question a little while back from Alex in the chat. And Alex, I think you probably beat me to the punch on that one. But if you didn't see on that resources panel, it shows up on the left there. Yeah, there is a link to download the data.
All right, do we have any questions? I think you should be able to take yourself off mute if you have questions, or type them into the chat. Nobody? We got a quiet group today. Okay, we have a question from Gail. Is this map also publicly available? Yes. It's the URL up here is, I can just share that out in the slide deck when I post that to our website. It's also on our website, and it's linked from the public map, I think. Yeah, so the public map is linked here, and if you go to this same panel in that map, you'll see a link for the Broadband Board Toolkit map. All right, well, since we have only about 5 minutes left, okay. Looking forward to experimenting with the map features. Thanks for that comment, Holly. I think if we have no questions, we'll just end a couple minutes early, and we're always here to answer questions if you have trouble using the map, or if something's not loading, you can just email us. You can click that contact form, or I'll include Tony and my contact information in the slide deck that we post on the website as well. I will put the URL to this map in the chat for you folks. All right. Well, thank you for joining and have a great Thanksgiving. And we'll have this presentation posted on our website in the next few days.
Thanks, everyone.